There comes a moment in every life when the ground beneath you no longer feels solid, when the constellations by which you once navigated vanish into an impenetrable night. This is not mere hardship, not the ordinary ebb and flow of suffering that visits all mortal lives. It is something far more profound, a dismantling so total that even language seems to fray at the edges when attempting to name it. The mystics called it the dark night of the soul, a term that has been whispered in sacred texts, painted in the shadows of art, and carried like a secret in the hearts of those who have endured it. But what no one tells you is that this darkness is not an ending. It is the unmaking before the rebirth, the silent alchemy that transmutes despair into revelation. Imagine standing at the edge of an abyss, not one of your own making, but one that seems to have opened up from the very fabric of existence itself. The fall is not voluntary. It is a surrender forced upon you by the collapse of all that once seemed certain. Relationships dissolve like mist at dawn. Beliefs you clung to reveal themselves as illusions. The work that gave you purpose suddenly feels hollow, a puppet show performed for an audience that has long since left. Even the divine, if you once felt its presence, withdraws into an unbearable silence. This is the dark night, not the absence of light, but the annihilation of the maps that once guided you toward it. Yet within this dissolution lies a paradox as old as time itself. The dark night does not come to destroy you, though it may feel like annihilation. It comes to strip away everything that is not you, the false identities, the borrowed convictions, the fragile scaffolding of a self built on approval and achievement. It is a spiritual wildfire, ruthless in its clearing away of the underbrush, so that something truer might take root. The process is merciless precisely because it is merciful. It will not allow you to remain in the smallness of who you thought you were. History's greatest seekers have all passed through this crucible, though their stories are often polished into palatable parables of triumph. We hear of Rumi's ecstatic union with the divine, but less of the years he spent unraveling after the disappearance of his beloved teacher, Shams. We read about the Buddha's enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree, but rarely sit with the terror of his nights facing Mara, the demon of illusion. Even Christ's cry of abandonment on the cross, Eli Eli lema sabachthani, is often hurried past in the rush toward resurrection. But it is in these moments of utter desolation that the most profound transformations are seeded. The dark night is not a deviation from the path, it is the path. It is the universe's way of rewiring you at the deepest level, breaking open the calcified husk of ego to make room for a more expansive consciousness. It asks everything of you because it is preparing you to hold everything, not as a conqueror, but as an empty vessel ready to be filled with a wisdom that can only be earned through surrender. And though no one may have told you this, the dark night is not a solitary ordeal. It is a universal rite of passage, a shared human experience disguised as isolation. To speak of it openly is to acknowledge that enlightenment is not all light. It is also shadow, the kind that clings and confounds until you learn to see in the dark. And when you do, you realize that the darkness was never your enemy. It was the womb, the cocoon, the sacred space where your old self could dissolve so that something more luminous might emerge. The dark night of the soul is not a storm that passes, leaving everything as it was. It is an earthquake that reshapes the bedrock of your being, an unraveling so deep that what emerges afterward is both familiar and utterly foreign. To understand it is to step beyond the simplistic notion of suffering as something to be endured, and into the recognition that this is a sacred dismantling, one that follows an invisible but precise architecture. There are themes here, patterns that repeat like echoes across traditions and lifetimes, guiding principles that reveal themselves only when you are ready to see them. One of the most unsettling truths about the dark night is that it is not a mistake, not a punishment, not a sign that you have strayed from some righteous path. It is rather the opposite, evidence that you have come exactly where you need to be. The soul, in its infinite wisdom, sometimes chooses the path of obliteration because it knows that the self you have constructed is too small to contain what wants to emerge. Imagine a seed that must split open for the sapling to rise. It does not debate whether the cracking of its shell is fair or deserved. It simply obeys the intelligence of life. The dark night operates with the same ruthless grace. Another core theme is the illusion of control. Before the dark night, you may have believed in the myth of your own agency, that with enough effort, enough virtue, enough understanding, you could steer your life towards safety and meaning. But the dark night laughs at such pretenses. It pulls the rug from under you not to humiliate, but to reveal the deeper truth, that real transformation happens not when you are holding the reins, but when you have been thrown from the horse. In that free fall, an ancient wisdom awakens, one that does not rely on plans or certainties, but on an unshakable trust in the unfolding. This is not passive resignation. It is the active surrender of the ego to intelligence far greater than itself. Then there is the theme of divine absence, the unbearable silence that seems to stretch between you and whatever you once called sacred. This is perhaps the most agonizing aspect of the dark night, the sense that you have been abandoned, not just by the world, but by the very source of life itself. And yet, the mystics whisper a secret. This absence is the most intimate form of presence. It is not that the divine has left you. It is that the divine has dissolved the forms through which you once perceived it. Like a mother bird removing the nest to force her fledglings into flight, the universe withdraws the comforts of spiritual experience so that you might discover what lies beyond them. A lesser-known but equally vital theme is the alchemy of uselessness. In the depths of the dark night, you may find that all your former tools, prayer, meditation, intellectual seeking, no longer work. They feel hollow, like empty rituals performed out of habit. This is by design. The dark night is not a problem to be solved, but a threshold to be crossed, and it demands that you lay down your weapons, your strategies, your attempts to fix yourself. Only in that state of utter helplessness does the real transmutation occur. The ego, stripped of its defenses, finally stops pretending it knows the way, and in that surrender, something else is born, a quiet, wordless knowing that needs no validation. Perhaps the most paradoxical theme of all is that the dark night is not darkness at all, but a light so blinding that it first appears as blackness. The mind, accustomed to its small candles of understanding, cannot at first comprehend the sun, so it interprets the influx of pure awareness as emptiness, as loss. But in time, as the eyes of the soul adjust, what once seemed like annihilation reveals itself as the beginning of true sight. There is an old tale, whispered among Sufi mystics, of a traveler who set out in search of God. For years he climbed mountains, crossed deserts, and sat at the feet of masters, each promising a key to the divine. One night, exhausted and disillusioned, he collapsed at the edge of a vast wasteland. As he lay there, half alive, the stars above began to pulse like a slow, rhythmic breath. The ground beneath him dissolved, and he found himself falling, not downward but inward, through layer after layer of himself. When he finally came to rest, he was no longer in a desert, but at the center of an endless ocean, suspended in a silence so complete it hummed. A voice, neither male nor female, spoke from the depths. You sought me in the heights, yet here I am, in the collapse of all seeking. This story is not merely a metaphor. It is a living map of the dark night's terrain. The wasteland is not a place of exile, but the holy ground where the ego's constructions crumble. The dissolution is not destruction, but the soul's homecoming. Across traditions, such symbolic narratives arise again and again, each a different doorway into the same truth. Consider the phoenix, that mythical bird consumed by its own flames only to rise anew from the ashes. The dark night is that fire, not a punishment from the gods, but the necessary combustion of all that can no longer serve the soul's expansion. The phoenix does not resist its burning, for it knows in some deep, featherless way that this is not its end but its metamorphosis. So too with the human spirit. What looks like annihilation is the prelude to a form of rebirth that could happen no other way. Then there is the alchemical process of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. The alchemists understood that gold cannot be extracted from base metals without first reducing everything to prima materia, the primordial chaos. The dark night follows this same arc. It dissolves your certainties, your relationships, your sense of purpose, not to leave you in ruins, but to return you to the essential matter from which a truer life can be forged. The chaos is not the absence of order, but the presence of a deeper order not yet visible. In the Hindu tradition, there is the story of Shiva, the destroyer, whose dance of annihilation clears the way for Brahma's creation. The dark night is Shiva's dance in the human soul, not a malevolent force, but the necessary dismantling without which nothing new can emerge. Those who have passed through this fire often speak of it in hindsight as a kind of grace, though at the time it felt like being flayed alive. Perhaps the most poignant symbol is the caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly. Inside the chrysalis, the creature does not simply grow wings, it liquefies. Every structure that once defined it breaks down into organic soup, with only a few imaginal cells holding the blueprint of what it will become. The dark night is that liquefaction. The old identity, the ways you knew yourself, the stories you told about your life, must dissolve before the imaginal self can take shape. And just as the caterpillar cannot imagine flight while still earthbound, you cannot conceive of what you are becoming until the transformation is complete. These stories are not mere myths, they are the soul's native language, the way it speaks in symbols when linear thought fails. They remind us that the dark night is not a deviation from the path, but the path itself, winding, treacherous, and ultimately sacred. The dark night of the soul is not some esoteric concept reserved for monks and mystics. It bleeds into the ordinary moments of life with startling clarity. It is there in the executive who suddenly walks away from a high-powered career, not for another job, but because the very meaning of success has turned to ash on their tongue. It is there in the parent rocking a sleepless child at 3 a.m., confronting existential questions they haven't faced since college as the baby's cries merge with their own silent scream into the void. This is where the rubber meets the road, where cosmic unraveling intersects with unpaid bills and strained relationships and the need to show up at a job when your soul feels hollowed out. One of the first practical truths about navigating the dark night is this: you cannot think your way out of it. The mind, accustomed to fixing and analyzing, will tie itself in knots trying to solve what is inherently a transformative process rather than a problem. This is where conventional self-help fails. No amount of positive affirmations or productivity hacks can accelerate the soul's gestation period. The real work happens in learning to tolerate the not knowing, to sit in the fire without scrambling for escape. Practical spirituality here looks surprisingly mundane. Washing dishes while your inner world quakes, attending meetings when your psyche feels like shattered glass, learning to function while carrying what feels like the weight of existential absurdity in your chest. Relationships become a crucible during this passage. Some connections will fall away, not because they were bad, but because they were built on a version of you that no longer exists. This is natural, though excruciating. The deeper challenge lies in the relationships that remain, particularly with those who haven't entered their own dark night. You may find yourself unable to explain why certain activities or conversations that once brought joy now feel intolerably superficial. This isn't elitism, it's the soul's refusal to participate in what no longer resonates with its unfolding truth. The art here is learning to honor your new boundaries without self-righteousness, while also recognizing that others are on their own timelines. Work and creativity undergo radical shifts. Many report feeling like they've lost their compass during this phase. Former passions dry up, career ambitions seem meaningless, and even artistic expression may feel blocked. This is the psyche's way of clearing the decks. The key is to resist the panic that demands immediate replacement of what's been lost. There's a hidden intelligence in the fallow periods, just as fields must rest between plantings. Practical survival might require maintaining old structures temporarily. Paying rent still matters, while allowing internal space for the new to gestate. Some find meaning in simple, embodied tasks, gardening, cooking, manual labor, that ground the spiritual upheaval in physical reality. The dark night also rewires your relationship with time. Modern life runs on achievement-oriented timelines, 5-year plans, quarterly goals, New Year's resolutions. The soul's transformation follows an entirely different rhythm, more akin to geological shifts than human schedules. This creates friction with societal expectations. Practical integration here involves developing what might be called holy patience, the ability to honor the process without demanding premature clarity. It's learning to say, "I don't know yet," to pressing questions about your future, and discovering that the world doesn't end when you stop pretending to have answers. Perhaps the most counterintuitive practical truth is that the dark night demands both surrender and fierce self-advocacy. Surrender to the larger process, yes, but also fierce protection of the space and conditions this rebirth requires. This might mean setting boundaries that disappoint others, turning down opportunities that no longer align, even if they look good on paper, or carving out sacred alone time even when your calendar protests. The balance lies in discerning between resistance to growth, which must be surrendered, and self-betrayal, which must be resisted. The dark night of the soul is not a detour on the spiritual path. It is the path itself, stripped bare of all illusions and comforting falsehoods. What began as an existential crisis, a shattering of all you believed yourself to be, reveals itself in time as the most profound act of grace your soul could orchestrate. This is the great paradox. The darkness was light all along. The emptiness was fullness. The death was rebirth. And what felt like abandonment was the most intimate embrace of your truest self. If you are in the midst of this unraveling, know this: you are not lost. The disorientation is proof that you are exactly where you need to be. The maps have burned away because you are being led into territories where maps cannot exist. The old comforts have vanished because you are being prepared for a joy that does not depend on external conditions. What feels like the end is the difficult, messy, glorious beginning of a life lived from the depths rather than the surface. This is the transformational call hidden within the dark night's crucible. To stop seeking outside yourself for the answers, the validation, the salvation you have been chasing. The dark night, in its merciless wisdom, removes every prop, every false refuge, until only the unshakable remains. And when you finally stop resisting, when you consent to the burning, the dissolution, the not knowing, you make the astonishing discovery that what you have been seeking is what has been seeking you all along. There comes a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when the darkness begins to shimmer. You notice that what once felt like emptiness now feels like space. What once felt like silence now hums with presence. The same experiences that once triggered despair now reveal their hidden gifts. You realize with a quiet shock that you have been remade, not into some perfected, enlightened being, but into someone more real, more broken, and more whole at the same time. This is the invitation, to stop fighting the process, to let the old identities fall away like dead skin, to sit in the fire and trust, even when every cell in your body screams to escape. The dark night is not your enemy, it is the womb of your becoming. And when you emerge, though you may bear scars, you will carry something priceless, the unshakable knowing of who you are when all the false layers have burned away. The journey through the dark night is ultimately a homecoming, not to the life you once knew, but to a life more vivid, more authentic, and more radiant than you could have imagined before the great unraveling began. The light you will find is not the light you lost, it is brighter,